Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support in the recent content. Excuse me. We do have a comment to read from Evan Ricard on TikTok, and this is probably one of my favorite comments that we've had in a very long time. And he said, "Hot take, but they should have pulled the plug on the Laurie trade. Said they would have gotten Kuminga and 2 1s. Should have flipped Kessler too. The Lakers would send Christie and a 1. Overall, A- offseason." And this is in regards to the Jazz offseason video and short that we did put out. And I actually like that idea of, hypothetically trying to deal out marketing, like everybody else was. So, yeah, good to see that the brain is still cooking.
Yeah, I mean, because again, that was kind of one of the questions of the offseason, right? In regards to there were so many rumors about marketing and whether or not Utah was going to be willing to move him or whether or not they were just going to re-sign him. And as we had already discussed, they ended up re-signing him, giving him a big max extension, and now he's off the books for at least this season. So now, whichever teams were interested in him, right, whether or not it's Golden State or even LA or others, now they're going to have to kind of regroup and figure out what to do.
Yeah, for sure. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so now we're moving into the final team of the Northwest Division that we're covering before we get to our final division. And that's the Denver Nuggets, right? Obviously the Denver Nuggets, what a ride it's been, right? Obviously, because you look at what they were able to do way back in the bubble and even seasons prior where they looked like an up and coming team. Obviously, they went into the conference finals in the bubble. Then obviously a year later, then Jamal Murray has the ACL tear, and then he doesn't play it all the following year. So they have basically back-to-back years of not really being able to do anything significant because, they didn't have one of their best players. Then, everything kind of worked out in its favor the year after that, right, which was 2 seasons ago. They had the best record in the Western Conference. At one point, they were way ahead of everybody. Then they took a decent chunk of the second half of the regular season off. Then they had an insane playoff run where, I mean, they lost, five playoff games, right? I think they lost, or 4 actually, right? Because they lost 1 in the first round, 1 in the finals, and then 2 in the second round. So, I mean, they went 16-4, only lost 1 game at home. Crazy playoff run. Jokic got Finals MVP. Jamal Murray was spectacular as well. Then last year, they went into the following season kind of as, the favorites or, at least co-favorites to win it all, right? Because it was them and the Celtics, right? That was kind of the matchup that I think a lot of people were anticipating. And going into the beginning of last year, right, I didn't actually think they would make the finals again just because I thought that they would miss Bruce Brown. They lost Jeff Green. And I wasn't necessarily sure if the guys, the young guys next up, right, would be able to handle it. The added responsibilities. Then they had their regular season. They actually won more games than the year before, but they fell to the 2 seed. And then going into the playoffs, we all kind of expected Denver to just kind of win it all again. Then in the first round, they played the Lakers, and they won in 5, right? So still not a long series, but in the individual games, right, they didn't look quite as dominant as they had looked the year before, right? Obviously, the games were kind of similar in that, it would come down to the wire and they would pull it out, but they were down by more than they were, in the previous games. They trailed for most of that series, right? Including double digits at different points. Just didn't quite look like how they looked the year before, but we gave him the benefit of the doubt. Jamal Murray looked like he was playing through injuries. And we thought, all right, well, then they'll go through Minnesota, but it'll be much tougher. And then they lost, right? And it was funny. They went down 0-2. We all thought it was over and that they were probably on the verge of either getting swept or losing in like 5. Then they tie it up. Then they go up 3-2, and it's like, oh, here come the Nuggets again. Then they lose by, what was it, like 40-50 in Game 6. But we thought, Game 7's at home in Denver. They'll pull it out. And then they go up 20-plus points in the third quarter. Looks like the series is over. And then they blow it. Then they choke. And then before you know it, it's done. Minnesota's in the conference finals against Dallas, where they promptly lose in 5 to the Mavs, and then the Mavs lose in 5 to the Celtics. So we kind of got robbed of the series that we were hoping and expecting to see. So a lot of reasons for that. The main reason it seemed like was just you just didn't get quite as good of a version of Jamal Murray as you had gotten the year prior, right? When you look at Jamal Murray's playoff stats the year before, right, the title year, he gave them 26 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds, 1.5 steals, 47 from the field, just under 40 from three at 7.5 3-point attempts a game. Last postseason, he gave them just over 20 points, 5.5 assists, 4 rebounds, 40 from the field, 31.5 from three. And that's kind of almost the entire difference there, just because of the fact that when Jamal Murray doesn't play, at the level that we've seen him play in the playoffs, it lowers Denver's floor because after that, you don't really have anyone else other than Jokic that can really give you, that type of juice from the perimeter in terms of the offense. Michael Porter Jr. sometimes can do it, but his offense is more so relegated to, catch and shoot, spot ups, cuts, not really a lot of on the ball work. And then Aaron Gordon, sometimes he'll have big offensive performances, but that's not really his role necessarily. He's more so kind of playing off of everyone else. So it's really after Jokic, Jamal Murray's responsibility to kind of handle, the load on offense. And the funny thing is in the regular season, honestly, he had probably his best regular season. He averaged 21 a game, 6.5 assists, 48 from the field, 42.5 from three, pretty much all career highs. Despite playing only 59 games, battling through injury in some of them. He was great in the regular season, but playoffs, he just stunk. And then it carried over into the Olympics. And, that's kind of the key thing for Denver here, honestly, because, obviously we'll get into the additions, shortly, but, you have Jokic, right, who most people still regard as the best player in the league. And he obviously is a stats machine, and the impact he has on his team is undeniable, but he still needs help and assistance. And, his co-star is going to have to be better, or else they have, basically no shot. Now, when you look at the additions that they made, and I guess also the losses they had in the offseason, right? They lost KCP. He left the Nuggets in free agency to go to the Orlando Magic, right? The Nuggets, I guess, just weren't quite willing to give him, the number he was looking for, and the Magic clearly were more than willing to give it to him. It was funny because we initially thought he would go back. I guess we're just kind of in the new normal of the new CBA, so we'll probably just have to kind of readjust, you know, our, positioning and thought process on, whether or not guys get re-signed. But it was still kind of, just a little surprising to see him leave because he was a big part of their title team. We know what he can do on both ends of the floor as a perimeter defender and a three-point shooter. But it's a huge gamble now because now you're going to basically be inserting Christian Brown up into the starting five. And, archetype-wise, he's a good defender as well. And there are certain types of players he can probably handle better defensively than KCP. He's a little stronger, more athletic. Like, say, like KCP couldn't handle Edwards at all. He just had no chance. He had no shot because of the fact that he's, kind of a he's kind of a thin guy for his position, right? Like KCP, a little over 200 at 6'5", but he's better suited guarding smaller, speedier guys, right? Like he's kind of like a chaser defensively. As a Laker fan, obviously, I have a little bit of insight into what he can do on both ends of the floor, but just, he's not really suited to guard up, right? In terms of like guard, like I remember on the Lakers, before they got, some of the guys that they got, they would ask him to sometimes try to guard like a Kawhi or a Paul George, and he couldn't because he's just not big enough.
Yep.
But for a Christian Brown, that's where he could probably help there. Not quite as speedy, but still a good athlete and still, strong. But then the 3-point shot, obviously, a little bit different. I mean, KCP is a good 3-point shooter. He's not a high volume 3-point shooter, but, he's been around 40%, the last several seasons. He's a career 37%, but since the title year with LA in the regular season, he shot 38.5% or better. Following year, 41%. Then in Washington, 39%. Then 42 and 40% from three for the Nuggets. But last postseason, he was not good. 8 points, 3 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 39.5 from the field, 33 from three. To be fair, he was hurt. It seemed like in the postseason because he had a couple of games where he just kind of was going in and out of the locker room. So that probably had part of it. That was probably part of it as well. But, when you look at his 3-point percentage or attempts a game, last season he shot 4.5 attempts a game. I mean, he doesn't take a lot of shots, period, anyways. Well, that was in the playoffs, but basically like somewhere around 8 shot attempts a game, and then from three, like 4 threes a game, which is fine, right? But it's not like, he takes like 6, 7, 8 threes a game. He's not a high volume 3-point shooter. But for Brown, he shot 38% from three last season, but only on 2 attempts a game. So he doesn't really take a high volume, and teams still kind of leave him open and kind of just are like, we don't really care, right?
Right.
Like, even if you shoot threes well, you don't take enough of them to really hurt us. So if he can improve his volume while still being good defensively, right, that could work. It's just we don't know because, obviously he did play a decent factor in their title run. He actually did play a lot in the postseason in most of those series other than the Lakers series. And he helped win them some games. But it's just it's a little bit different coming off the bench and being a change of pace guy versus now you're going against starting units, right? You're gonna probably be taking on the other team's best perimeter player, offensive player, and that's a tall task. But in terms of their actual additions, right? Russell Westbrook, Dario Saric, Daron Holmes. Daron Holmes, right? That was their first round draft pick, right? It was kind of expected for him to go there because he stopped doing meetings with other teams because he was reportedly promised, a spot from a team. It seemed like it was going to be Denver because they needed to back up big, right? He can, kind of a guy that can play on both ends of the floor. He can space the floor from three, but obviously we're not going to see him this year because he tore his Achilles in the summer league. So that's rough for him. Basically a lost season. Hopefully he comes back next year and, ends up being a good rotational piece for them. But that hurts, right? Because that hurts your regular season depth. And maybe he could have been something in terms of a guy that could give you like 15 minutes a game or something like that, or
Mm-hmm.
10, 12. Because it's not like Jokic is going to play 20 minutes a game. He's going to play a lot. After that, Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric, 2 veterans. Obviously, Westbrook, former All-Star, former MVP, but at a different point in his career. He is 36, right, coming off of his stint in LA with the Clippers, right, which did not end up panning out in the end, right, because last postseason he was not very good. But to be fair, obviously, Kawhi wasn't really playing. Paul George was playing but wasn't really playing well. And then even the year before when he actually had a good playoff performance for the Clippers, again, no Paul George at all, and then no Kawhi Leonard after about 2 games. So I don't necessarily fault him for some of the positions that he's been in just because of the fact that, I mean, what can you really do? Even like in LA, right? His first season in LA, LeBron and AD did miss a decent amount of time, but he's also still not quite, a star guy anymore. Can he be a solid rotational piece off the bench? I mean, again, he did that for the Clippers by and large. But the question is always the postseason because we know in the regular season he can get up and down the floor, he can find shooters and cutters, he can run your second unit, he can get you extra possessions, get you rebounds, battle against more physical guys. But we know in the postseason that's where it kind of just comes apart because of the fact that teams dare him to shoot from the outside. He's not a very good outside shooter. Very turnover prone at times. And then even like defensively, right? Sometimes he'll get lost, not really commit to playing strong defense, right? We know this, we've seen this. For a minimum contract, right? I mean, you could do a lot worse. So it's not even that it's a bad signing at all. I'm just curious to see how it really works because we've seen him in, a couple of postseason environments, right? Or teams that are trying to win games, and it just ended up not working out. But again, those situations by the end were less than ideal because in LA with the Lakers, it was never a good fit, period. And then for the Clippers, your 2 best guys weren't available in the playoffs because they were hurt. So now you're coming to an already made contender, which was, I guess, kind of supposed to be the Clippers last year, but regardless, you're going to be playing alongside Jokic. Curious to see how that fit works in terms of the playmaking from both of those guys. How many minutes do they share together versus how much does Westbrook play more so with the second unit? So it'll be interesting to see. They also grabbed Dario Saric, right? Who's a backup big man. He played for the Warriors last year. Played a lot for them early on in the season. Honestly, played a lot more than I think you would expect. They were
Mm-hmm.
very reliant on him. And then towards the latter part of the season, when they started looking a little bit better, wasn't really playing at all. So I mean, so don't
Just
necessarily
throwing
know
that
how
out
much.
there, yeah.
Yeah. So and again, it's like I understand that. Okay, he's making $6 million a year. I guess that's like the taxpayer MLE or whatever. And I guess they had to get rid of Reggie Jackson, trade him away, dump him, and then also let go of KCP. It's like I would rather just have KCP, to be honest. And Westbrook was a minimum, so it's not like Westbrook would have, it's not like you couldn't get Westbrook if you brought back KCP, but I guess they were mindful of the CBA as well because of the fact that by re-signing KCP, you lose so much flexibility and you don't really have the ability to add on to the rest of the roster, and you're kind of locked in to this roster that may not be quite good enough. I don't know, but still, we don't have to rehash it again, but I do feel like that was a loss. But ultimately, it really does also come down to, like I said, in addition to Murray, the young guys too, right? And the three main young guys would be Christian Brown, Julian Strawther, and Peyton Watson. If those three guys can give them solid 3-and-D production at basically Brown is a guard, then you got Watson as a wing, and then Strawther is like a swing guy, kind of. I guess Brown is a swing guy as well. But if they can all provide you decent perimeter shooting and solid defense from the guard and the wing spot, then you might have something there, because then that will allow you to be able to take advantage of, all right, now we have more depth than we might have had before, when they basically had none, right, last year by and large. And then it would be nice if one of those other young guys might be able to help, but it feels like those guys may just be a lost cause, like Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson. They just don't really look like rotational players,
Right.
honestly. I mean, that's kind of a rough thing because last year they drafted three of those guys, and only one of them in Strother looks like he might be a rotational guy, and we'll still have to see with him. And that's where I think Westbrook can help because again, push the pace, find shooters and cutters. But at the end of the day, those guys got to be able to shoot. If they're not respectable perimeter threats, then nobody's going to care, and those guys won't be able to play a whole lot. But like say even a Peyton Watson, he's a guy that can block shots as a wing. He's athletic, he's long, he can get you extra possessions. But his rookie season he shot 43% from three, but on 0.6 attempts a game in 8 minutes a game, which is basically nothing. Then last season, when he played 19 minutes a game, shot 29% from three on two
Mm-hmm.
attempts a game. So just not good enough. But but like if we're talking about the tiers of importance, honestly, like I said, number one is Jamal Murray. Because again, if he doesn't give you all-star, all NBA level production in the playoffs, they have no shot. Then after that, it's Westbrook slash the young guys, right? Like, and I think honestly more so the young guys because you're talking about three pieces, right? And if all of them are actually good, that would be really helpful. Then you can kind of get away with, okay, Westbrook doesn't have it this game, but we still have Jokic and Murray, and we can still plug in those other guys. So that's not as bad. But who knows? Because they just haven't proven anything yet, and that's kind of the scary part to be in, where it feels like if you have Jokic, you shouldn't really be trying to presumably kind of cut corners. But, what was it? The GM for the Nuggets, right? I think it was Calvin Booth, right? He was kind of, in a quote last year, he was basically almost kind of saying, like, it'll be okay not winning it this year. Like, he would rather be in a position to win, like, maybe multiple championships over a long period of time versus, like, just being able to go back to back, which, okay, I can kind of understand. But at the same time, like your team is ready to win now. Like you already have an already established core. And, obviously Bruce Brown, you don't fault them for losing him because they just couldn't afford it. Like, I mean, he was on a 1-year deal. He got 20 million a year from Indiana. There's no way they could have matched that. But the KCP one is kind of rough. Even the Jeff Green one because of his age, I understand. But I don't know. It just is kind of unfortunate that they lost two key role players in the last two seasons while the rest of the Western Conference has improved. So, they're kind of in that status now where I do think it's not I think it's I don't think we should count them out because they still have Jokic and Jamal Murray, and they are the only team of these teams in the West that do have a proven core. I know there are teams like, say, Golden State and LA that have won titles in the past, but like in terms of the current team right now, we saw Denver win a title a year ago. So we know that they have a team that's capable of winning the title. It's just, they're no longer, I think, like the obvious favorites in the Western Conference, but they could still make it. It's just that now they're in that camp of the things that I laid out, I think need to happen for them to have a really good shot at making the finals and also winning it. Because I do think that they are a team that can match up against the Celtics because of the Jokic factor, just in terms of, then that means you're forced to put Porzingis on Jokic, and then that might open up the floor for everyone else. But, Boston is still really good, so there's still no guarantees. But they still got to be able to get to the finals, and I just don't know how great I feel about it. Minnesota made some changes, so we'll see, because that was a tough matchup for them last year. And then OKC got better. OKC won the regular season matchup last year, although I think Jokic didn't play in one of those games. And then when you look at their other competition, Dallas, I mean, I think they won the season series against the Mavs, but obviously Luka and Kyrie are always a difficult matchup. So, it feels like they're kind of now, instead of a favorite, they're kind of lumped in with everyone else in the Western Conference. But I do think they still have a shot. I would say I give them a B for the offseason because, again, they were actually able to add guys that can be rotational pieces. It's just all of them have, Westbrook and Sharge, they both have questions in terms of how effective can they be in the postseason. And then you're still leaving the chance, what are we going to get out of the young players? I like the Holmes pick, but he's not going to play, so he doesn't factor in at all. And then after that, what else did they do? I think they brought back DeAndre Jordan, brought back Vlatko Chanchar, who was a guy who was a rotational piece for them in prior seasons, but he, I think, had a ACL injury or meniscus injury or something, so he didn't really play. So, their offseason was all okay, but still not great because I would have preferred them to keep KCP and maybe add one of those guys as opposed to losing KCP. But obviously I understand that the main polarizing conversation for a lot of people is the Westbrook piece, just because of the fact that he's been on a different team like almost every year for the last 5-6 seasons. But what do you think about this Denver group?
I'm pretty high on them if I'm keeping it real.
Yeah.
I liked everything that they did this offseason. I think, every move was kind of thought out pretty methodically. I think, they're moving fairly smart. Smarter than I thought they would. After they lost KCP, initially, like the raw thoughts, I was like, yeah, they're cooked. Like they're you can't replace that. But then I thought about it. The three guys, they do have the three young ones, Strother, Peyton Watson, Brown. I think, they have the potential to take the leap. It's just a matter of like taking the
Do
leap
they?
to a serviceable role player on a championship roster.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible. It's possible. And then bringing in Russell Westbrook, that's obviously the marquee move, I guess you could call it that. Um, I think you can't hate on it regardless because it's a direct upgrade over who they lost in Reggie Jackson, because I think you do have
Mm-hmm.
to look at it from that perspective. He's going to be the backup point guard. I highly doubt that he starts. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Oh no,
Yeah.
no,
I don't think he's there. There might be like possibilities in lineups where, it can work against certain matchups, but like you were talking about come postseason, I like it. Have him command, the second unit. I think it's going to be pretty good because we know what he can do. He makes people around him better, I think. Throughout his career, he's done that, even though he has the, I guess, stigma of not, which is hilarious. But regardless, I think they're thinking around this whole CBA thing, and you can definitely see that it's changing a lot of teams' mindsets because they're going with youth. And, we've talked about it multiple times over the past year. Youth is such a double edged sword, but the payout for the positivity of it is just amazing because you can extend your championship window, your timeline, whatever you want to call it. And I think the three guys, if just one of them, I'm just gonna say one, takes that
Mm-hmm.
leap and replaces KCP and just plays up to par, I think that would be awesome. I just don't know which one has the potential to do so because the problem is Strother can shoot probably the best out of the three, but he
Mm-hmm.
can't defend as well as the other two.
Right.
Brown is pretty freaking athletic, but
Yeah.
then you like Peyton Watson's frame a little bit more. So it's kind of weird. Holmes being out does hurt, but that's an awesome pick because you addressed a big need. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
overall, they addressed kind of all the holes that were, I guess, hurting them a little bit outside of
Mm-hmm.
losing KCP, and that's what drags the grade down for me. I have them at
Right.
a B plus because if they were able to retain him and then do some other stuff, then yeah, automatic A. But I think it's still going to be tough. Like it's no easy task, but they're
Right.
definitely underrated because at the end of the day, you still have Jokic, who a lot of people consider the best player in the NBA. Um, so, he's still going to go off. It's like you
Hmm.
said, this is Jamal Murray's year. He's got a lot to prove. And I would honestly even loop in a guy like Michael Porter Jr. This is a prove it year for him too. I need to see more from him. I know we saw some good things, but I saw a lot of bad, and I don't want to see that bad anymore. And that's why I
Hmm.
think people are kind of low on that contract. But regardless, it is what it is. I think Aaron Gordon is also in that tier where he's underrated. So not really prove it, but underrated for him. But Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray need to step it up. That's all I'm gonna say on them.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the key piece because again, like you mentioned, like with Gordon, we already know what his role is, and unlike Porter and Murray, his role isn't quite as geared towards offense. Like obviously, you don't want him giving you like 2 points,
Right.
but Murray's your primary ball handler and perimeter scorer, and then Michael Porter Jr. is the other guy that can get hot and can kind of be a swing piece where if he's on fire, right, he can kind of change the course of the game, right? Again, as a Laker fan, obviously I saw in some of those games where because Murray wasn't playing well in that series. He had the 2 game winners, but
Yeah.
Michael Porter Jr. was kind of the other guy outside of Jokic, obviously, that was kind of keeping them in there. Because
Lakers
every
left them
time,
wide open too.
yeah, exactly, yeah, because every time, like even if Murray missed a shot, boom, there goes Michael Porter Jr. who hits some crazy three or jumper or whatever.
Right.
But and that's a good point where when you look at the Nuggets offense, which we hadn't even gotten into yet, but when you look at their offense, right, obviously we know what they can do in terms of the post play, but when you look at their numbers last season, so they were 5th on offensive rating, and then they were 8th defensively. So, that's pretty good. 4th in net rating. But in terms of 3-point percentage, they were 10th in percentage, but 30th in attempts, right? Only 31 a game. And that's
Hmm.
something where um, it would be nice if you could not be the lowest 3-point attempting team in the league,
Yeah.
because of the fact that they do have some good 3-point shooters on there. It's just some of those guys are probably going to have to just take more. And that's, like you said, where a Michael Porter Jr. factors in because we know he can shoot threes at a high level and he's probably going to have to take more. Can they find a way to maybe play some smaller lineups? Could you get away with Michael Porter Jr. at the 4 and then, maybe one of those young guys at like the 3 or something like that? Find some ways to get some smaller space lineups because you're going to have to figure that out with Westbrook anyways
Yeah.
because you need him to be able to have as much space as possible. And, in some of the preseason games, that's kind of what they've tried to do where they'll have like Westbrook and Saric out there alongside some of the young guys. It's just obviously if you're talking about like, all right, let's say Westbrook, Saric, and Porter. Okay, well, those 3 guys are not the best defenders, and you don't really have a lot of rim protection there. But again, for those second units where they tend to be more chaotic, anyways, you can play more up tempo. Maybe you can push the pace, and like I said, find open shooters because that's what they're gonna have to do. It's just obviously the issue is that one of the guys that you just added is not a 3-point shooter. And so that's going to be a problem. And then you just lost a guy who is a really good shooter. And you're going to elevate a guy into the starting 5 who shoots them at a good percentage, but doesn't shoot them enough for the defense to respect them. And then again, and that's where it would be nice to see the young guys continue to progress. Then Watson, if he plays more, well, he hasn't been able to show that he can consistently hit threes. So that's something that they're going to have to find a balance for. Because I think, like, you don't have to be the best 3-point shooting team in the league, but you can't be a team that barely shoots them at all. I mean, I
Right.
know, like, even the year before, they didn't take, like, a ton, but, I mean, they were 25th, which was a little better, but they were also, like, 4th in 3-point percentage. And then if you watch them in the playoffs, right, well, then they didn't really miss threes at all, right, in that year that they won the title, because you look at their 3-point shooting in the postseason. I mean, almost all the main guys shot like almost 40% from
Right.
three in the starting five. Like Michael Porter Jr. in that was actually the worst 3-point shooter in their starting 5 the title year at 35%, which is still not bad. Then KCP shot 38%. Aaron Gordon shot 39%. Jokic, or excuse me, Murray shot just under 40, and then Jokic shot 46% from 3. Again, not like a ton of crazy attempts, but that's a lot of, really good 3-point shooting. And that's where obviously when they get hot from there, it's tough to stop. So I'd like to see if they can find some more ways to get some open threes there just because of from their actual good 3-point shooters, because of the fact that, again, if you want to try to beat a team like Boston, I mean, obviously you don't necessarily have to match their style, but we know Boston can get hot. And, if they're going to get hot, then it's going to be really tough to stop. But obviously for Boston, they don't have to shoot threes to win. And the Nuggets don't have to shoot or make a ton of threes to win. It's just, the versatility from some of the guys in Denver are just not proven yet. So that's kind of the concern that I have. But in the West, they are kind of the only team of the core four that people have grouped together right now, right? Denver, Dallas, Minnesota, and OKC. They're the only team that actually has proven that they can win the title. The other teams have a chance, but they haven't done it yet. And that's where I'm with you, where it's like you can't count them out because of the fact that we've seen them do it. It's just a matter of it's going to probably be a lot more difficult than it was the year they won the title,
Yeah.
just because of the fact that the rest of the West has gotten better and they haven't necessarily gotten better with it. But and then even with like a Jokic, just kind of from like a sidebar, and that's kind of what I was kind of hinting at with the 3-point shooting. Like, he shot 46% from three in the playoffs the title season. And then in the playoffs last season, you want to know what he shot?
Like 20 something, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
26% from three. And that's a problem because of the
Yeah.
fact that, like, once some of the other guys aren't really hitting threes, then it would be nice to have him shoot, a higher percentage. And it's not that, like, that's their biggest issue, but, like, say against the Wolves, there became a point where he was kind of forced into taking a lot of, threes towards the latter part of that series, even in game 7, right? There were, like, a lot of empty possessions where he has no choice but to kind of shoot the open three that they're giving him because they got 2 7-footers out there and he was missing. And that's
Mhm.
kind of the difference, is that, like, the 3-point shooting this postseason wasn't there. And again, you can factor in back to back is hard because you got to fight through fatigue for 2 straight postseasons. You got to be healthy. So this is where, like, I think they could have one of those revenge type years and kind of remind everybody why they should still be feared. It's just a matter of you don't quite feel as confident that they can do it, but I think they can do it because they have proven the ability to do so. It's just going to be different, right?
Mhm.
Like, then that's kind of the main thing there. Where, like you said, it's a kind of a youth movement. It's just the question is are those guys ready to rumble in the postseason? Because I think worst case scenario, they should at least look relatively fine in the regular season, right? Like, I
Yeah.
don't see any reason why Peyton Watson should look out of sorts in the regular season because this isn't, this is year 3 for him. Strother might be different because, this is even though it's his second season, it's really his first year of, like, probably getting real minutes
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
didn't really play a lot of their, young guys last season at all, right? Other than
No.
the guys who were already there. Like, the 3 guys that they drafted, Strother, Tyson, and Pickett, didn't play in the regular season, basically. Like, I mean, I, I don't remember seeing them out there. I mean, Strother played in 50 games, 10 minutes a game.
Yeah. I mean, it was all garbage time though.
Yeah, exactly. Jalen Pickett played in 27 games and played 4.5 minutes. Like
Right.
you said, garbage time. Hunter Tyson played in 18 games,
I
2
forgot
minutes a
about
game.
him.
Exactly. And that's my point, where it kind of hurts that, we haven't seen anything from any of those guys. But I think, as you and I have kind of already hinted at, Strother of those 3 is the guy that's probably got the most juice, because if he pans out, he could be like a nice instant offense type 3-point shooter off the bench, you know, but with a little bit more defensive upside than maybe like a Hunter Tyson. And then
Right. Yeah.
obviously he's got size and athleticism advantage over Pickett, who just doesn't seem like he's gonna really
Yeah.
be much of an NBA player at this point. So,
Yeah.
um, but either way, I don't know, because that's the thing, is that, and that's kind of why, like, this Nuggets team is interesting, is, fascinating to talk about, because let's say it doesn't work out. Well, then what's the next move? Because you already lost KCP, and they just signed Jamal Murray to that big max extension, which they had to do because no brainer there, because he helped them win a title even with the rough postseason last year. Right, you can't lose him for nothing. And then KCP's gone, and now at some point you'll have to start giving extensions out to some of these guys. I think Aaron Gordon is due for an extension pretty soon, right? Because this is he makes 22 million this year. Then he has a player option at the end of this season or whatever. And then you look around the rest of the roster. Christian Brown will be due for an extension next offseason because this is year 3. And then, at some point you might have to start thinking about extensions for these other guys. So, in terms of the flexibility pieces, it's not really a whole lot unless you move one of the core guys, right? And Michael Porter Jr., down the line, that might be the guy, but I don't see them doing that anytime soon. It's just of those guys in that group, that's the one guy that I could see them realistically thinking about moving and splitting up. But again, like you said, he's still a relatively young guy, and presumably without KCP, they might need him more on offense than before. So, if he continues to play at a high level, continues to show he can do some things other than just hit threes, that would be nice. And then, of course, it's very painful to have Zeke Najee's contract just sitting there and he doesn't even play. And he's, in
Yeah.
what, like year 4 or 5 at this point, I think,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I
But what do
mean,
you think about
overall, they're in a bind.
that?
They knew this coming into this season, which is why they're moving the way that they are. Like they need to prioritize these, late first round picks and stuff like that. You need these guys to show up and show out. And I agree with you, in terms of Michael Porter Jr. being the guy who's potentially on the chopping block if they want to break the band up and improve a little bit. It only makes
Mhm.
sense, based off the contract, the production or lack thereof, I guess you could call it. Um, but the problem is he might be one of those undesirables, you're probably gonna have to ship him off to like a rebuilding team or something, that's looking to take on an immense amount of cap, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah,
that's a lot of money for, the numbers
35,
that he's putting up. Like they're not
35.
bad. You just want a
Yeah,
little bit more.
35 million this year, 38 million the next, and then 40 million in 2026, 2027.
Yeah, like the return on the investment, I don't think you can say it's been like a crapshoot or anything like that. I don't think it's
Right.
been like, god awful, which is why,
Oh,
you're just hinting at the fact like, what's next if you don't get anything done in the next couple of
right.
years. Well, that's the move that you have to look at. So right now, not time to panic, but yeah, I
No.
think, if we're looking into the future, he's definitely the one who's probably going to have to be moved on from.
Yeah, because I don't think, because obviously, like, you're not moving on from Jokic. I don't think you're moving on from Jamal Murray either.
Mm-mm.
And then Gordon, I think, as a defensive guy and kind of just like a versatile all around guy, I don't think you can really
Too valuable.
let him go either. I think, yeah, he's too valuable. It's just Porter is kind of the one. But again, as you and I kind of already hinted at, that's not something that you have to do right now. That's kind
Mm-mm.
of break glass in case of emergency scenario where again, it's not working. You're not any closer to a title than you were a year ago, and you kind of have to, or maybe you do even worse, and then you kind of have to find a way to to make up for it somehow. Because again, like ultimately, they need extra pieces. And so that's why for these young guys, if they can provide them with those extra pieces, then they're basically kind of set. Then you can kind of maybe see if you can find a way to bring in a veteran or two at the deadline or something like that. Maybe. But, again, that's always like you said. That's the double-edged sword when you're having to rely on young players because of the fact that sometimes they don't progress in a linear fashion, and sometimes they're just not quite ready to take on a bigger role.
Right.
Where, again, we saw like a guy like a Christian Brown in, a more limited role be a piece for,
Right.
their championship run. But can he do it in a more improved role where, like I said, he's not going against second units as much? He's going against starters. He's going to be guarding the other team's best opposing offensive, guard for most of the game. Like he could do it. He's got the frame and the physical athletic tools. It's just, are we actually going to see it? And then the other guys I have not seen much of anyways. Like I mean Watson we've kind of seen it but only in flashes because again, right now he can't shoot. And then Strother same thing. Like we haven't I mean we've seen less of him, but I think he's, the guy where I feel like that one is going to pan out as a solid pick. But the other two guys that they drafted, like I don't really like being, saying that like I'm out on guys like after like 1 year, but it just feels like the other two dudes might just be lost causes. I mean, what do you think of Hunter Tyson and Jalen Pickett?
I haven't seen anything from them. If outside of summer league stuff, I really haven't seen anything. Um, and it's not a good sign that they're not even really playing a lot in preseason either. So
Mm.
that doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence on them. But I mean, if they can turn out to just be serviceable end of the bench guys, then that's fine. But it doesn't even
Mhm.
seem like they're at that point yet, and that's kind of concerning. The
Right.
upside is there, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
And for those guys, they are, much older young players because Pickett is 25 and
Yeah.
Tyson is 24. So it's not like those are, supposedly like very raw 19-year-old prospects. Those guys are supposed to be super experienced college players.
Mhm.
Because I think Pickett went to Penn State
Yep.
and then Tyson, I think that was Clemson, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, so those guys, and again, they're much older. I mean, they're older than some of the guys that they, drafted previously. I mean, like both of those guys are older than Zeke Naji, who's been there for, 4 or 5 years and still isn't good.
Right.
So
Yeah. Tell me about it.
yeah, and I do wonder like what's kind of gone wrong with him, like from the perspective of like, because ideally you would think, okay, that's a possible big that you could have out there. And it seemed like he could be a guy that can kind of double as floor spacer, but then also like athletic rebounder, possible shot blocker. But like as a rookie, you know, in the limited minutes and games he played, his first 2 years he looked fine, but the last couple of years it seems like he's just had a major drop off. I mean, his minutes have only gone down as he has you know, been around longer. And again, when they have even less depth at the big man spot, because they used to have like Mason Plumlee as like a backup center. I think they had DeMarcus Cousins the year before they won the title.
Yeah.
So, it's not like their big man depth is amazing outside of Jokic, because, DeAndre Jordan, right, is the only other, I think, true backup center. And I mean, at this point, because of his age, he shouldn't, he doesn't really need to play quite as consistently.
Yeah, well, I think with Najee, he plays more like a 4 in my opinion.
Right.
Um, I do understand the thought process of him being a 5, but if you kind of look at the timeline that he got there, like his first 2 years, that was also when Aaron Gordon was kind of figuring out his role on the team as well. And then
Hmm.
in the past couple of years, Aaron Gordon has been amazing at that starting, 4 position. So
And I,
there's
mhm.
been no need for Zeke Naji, even though like you would want what his skill set brings. I mean, there just hasn't been a lot of opportunity, I think.
Yeah, and that might be part of it where maybe he just ended up not really being a good fit for the team.
Hmm.
Because ideally, it's like you'd like to have somebody that can kind of do more stuff at the five, but like you said, he's a four. I mean, I guess it'd be nice to have a 4 or 5 because then maybe like they could play alongside Jokic, but he
Right.
doesn't. I mean, he just
No,
doesn't really seem like he can
no,
really do that because
no.
the shooting hasn't been there, and I don't know. I mean, but and that's why the Dayron Holmes one, if that guy pans out, that could be a really solid pick, and he could just be better. But of course, he's going to be sidelined for a whole year due to the Achilles injury.
Yep.
So,
Unfortunate.
um, yeah, and then kind of now in terms of like where we see them positioned in the West. So the over unders for the Nuggets has them at 51 and a half games. So, behind the Thunder, behind Minnesota, behind Dallas. So Vegas basically has them as like I guess fourth kind of in terms of where they see them. So over under, what do you think about 51 and a half for Denver? Cuz then after that it's a decent drop off in the West. I think. Yeah.
I think I think they go over. I think they have a
Mhm.
better regular season maybe than Dallas if I'm keeping it real. I just
Mhm.
have a lot of confidence with them in the regular season. They're so good. And they really tend to kind of beat up on people in the regular season, which is the funny part. Um yeah, I just think they've not taken a step back to the point where I think they're going to lose a crap ton of games where it's like, yeah, they're going to drop all the way to fourth. There's no way I see that happening. I think they'll be right at that 1, 2, 3 spot. I don't see them going any lower than 4.
Yeah. Okay, so this Vegas layout is a little bit different. Yeah, because it looks like Dallas they have it 49 and a half. So I guess Denver I guess is basically third, right? So like meaning the difference of 2 games. And that's where I think I mean, they won 57 games last season, and it felt like they were worse for a decent chunk of last year than the year like they won the title. So I'm curious to see what they do because I mean, like, but part of the 57 wins kind of came from the post All Star break. They basically went gangbusters and won like almost every game, and
Hmm.
maybe by that point they just didn't have quite enough left in the tank. So this time around, maybe they might be able to get off to a better start. Not that they ever like were horrible in the standings because they weren't. I'm just saying like there might be like a little bit more of a level of consistency where you don't end up having to, you know, basically win like 20 out of your last like 25 or 29 games or something like that.
Hmm.
Um so I think they could be a slight over because I don't expect them to get to 57. But I think they could get to like, I think the year they won the title, they were at 53. So I think 53, somewhere around that, is pretty doable. Because as long as Jokic is healthy, you probably got about 50 wins in the bag anyways. It's just, it would be nice if, it's just Jamal Murray probably needs to play, if you can get like 60-ish games out of Jamal Murray, right? So maybe he doesn't miss more than like 25 games, and then Jokic you get for, his typical somewhere around 70 or more. I think that's probably enough because even the guys that aren't necessarily like great, again, Jokic can make them better enough that that should help. And ideally, Westbrook in the regular season should be able to juice up those second units, and that may help the starters by the time the playoffs roll around because they're not going to have to grind out every possession like they usually do in the regular season. Because, like you said, it's a little bit different. Because, like, say with the Celtics, last year when they won the title, they were winning by basically blowing teams out every other game. Whereas with the Nuggets, they would win a lot, but it was not normally like a 20 plus point win. It wasn't usually like a 15 plus point win. They could blow you out, but it was usually like a little bit closer. Like maybe like, you know, a decent chunk of the game was kind of back and forth, and then they would pull it out in the end,
Right.
right? As opposed to, Boston, where the game is over after like two quarters. Like, how many times last year did we see the Celtics just, you know, win a game in like 20 minutes? Like, there was like the one game they played, I remember, against, what was it, Golden State, right? Where the game was kind of close in the first quarter. And
Mm.
then by the time the first half was over, they were already down by like 50 points. Like, it was
Right.
so
Right.
bad sent the starters for Golden State home. Denver doesn't normally do that. So, then also to be, the last year they were 27th in pace, and that's the other aspect I think for Westbrook. Where he can help, and that's where I think, like you said, they're gonna be different, and different might be good for this team, just because it felt like maybe they might have been able to have got squeezed as much as they could out of what they had before. Just because, and it sucks because they did have kind of like two lost seasons during a stretch where they could have conceivably contended for the title, the years that Murray was out with his ACL. But, it was probably time to kind of make some adjustments, anyways. It's just a matter of are they going to be effective? That's still TBD. But I'm not out on them. You know what I mean? Like, because I know
Yeah.
because there are a decent amount of people I think that have kind of, I don't know if counted them out is the right word, but they're definitely much lower on them now to
Just
the
threw him
point
to the
where,
side, discarded him, forgot about him,
right,
whatever.
yeah. I just feel like some of those other teams that they're throwing them away for, we need to see what they have. Like, some of the teams I can like say like Dallas went to the finals, so I can understand like you know if maybe you're higher on Dallas, but Denver they do have a title, so I think if when they're at their best, I think they can match up against any of these teams. But I
Yeah.
again, it will definitely be much tougher because they don't have the security blankets that they had in the past with some of the role players they had. Now you have to hope that those guys progress. But if they do, then they're going to look really good because then you have the benefit of youth plus experience with the guys they have. So I think they can do it. So ultimately, I guess the question is, as of right now, because of course things can change because we kind of sort of cemented probably our predictions kind of we haven't completely put them out there yet, but I think we kind of said we think OKC is probably the favorite to come out of the West. But ultimately, like, what do you think is the most likely scenario for Denver this season? Like,
Um.
probably like about last year, maybe like somewhere between like second round to conference finals, maybe finals, like if everything goes right.
I would say conference finals should be
Conference finals.
their floor, if I'm being real.
Right.
Um, just considering that you still have the same duo, you still have some of the other options that you won the title with,
Right.
and then you brought a couple other guys in who presumably will make a positive impact on your roster. But honestly, this might be a hot take, but I'm gonna just chalk up last year to them getting figured out by a team that was quite literally built to beat them. So
Mhm.
I think if they run into somebody else instead of
Mhm.
Minnesota, we'd probably be having a different conversation.
Yeah, and that's kind of the fair point where, right at the end of the regular season, the bad luck kind of came in, right?
Mm.
Where they ended up losing that one game to Devontae Graham and the San Antonio Spurs. Forgot to mention also Wemby was a part of that game as well. But and then that dropped them down, right? Because they were basically right on the cusp of getting the 1 seed right before they lost that game because that was like the second to last game of the NBA season, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken. I think it might have been third to last, but either way, then that kind of shook up the whole playoff map because it dropped the Nuggets from 1 to 2, and then it put them in the same bracket with Minnesota, and then they played the Lakers in the first round, right? Like if
Yep.
they were the 1 seed, probably would have played New Orleans without Zion, and then they probably smoked New Orleans. Then they end up playing, the winner of Clippers Mavs, presumably Dallas. Who knows what happens there? And then they get, whoever's left between, I guess, like Minnesota, OKC, and whomever else, right? So, like, and that's, but again, that's part of the calculus and the luck of winning a title is sometimes you have to have certain matchups and things go your way. Like, even the year they won the title, right? They played, Minnesota, right? Who didn't have, what was it, Nas Reed and Jaden McDaniels. Not saying that Minnesota would have won, they wouldn't have, but, obviously that made that series different, right? Then it was the Suns, but the new look Suns. And then, of course, Ayton and Chris Paul are hurt. Then they play the Lakers, who were healthy, but they were, like the 7th seed that had just kind of been putting stuff together. Then they play the 8th seeded Miami Heat. So, not calling them lucky at all because you play who you play, just like Boston, right? Like, yeah, Boston was fortunate that all the teams they played were hurt, but both you and I iterated that I think they were still really good and they would have beaten those teams anyways. And they had a couple of years, right, where they had bad luck go their way in terms of injury. Even the year before, where Jason Tatum gets hurt at the start of Game 7 against the Heat, and then he's basically neutralized for the remainder of the game in a game that I know they got blown out, but at the beginning of the game we didn't know what was going to happen. So,
Right.
but I think for like you said, I think I'm just gonna chalk up last year to just kind of just things didn't go your way. Probably a little too big for your britches, and then like you said, you got put in a matchup against a team that was built to beat you.
Yeah.
So I think conference finals should be, I think, where I would expect them this year. I mean, of course, not. It may not happen, but if it's not conference finals, then this would be a bad season, I think, for them.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, I guess the question is now of those 3 teams, considering all 3 of those teams have made changes to their rosters, which team do you think, if you're the Nuggets, you'd rather face the most? And then which team do you think they should want to avoid the most?
Um, Probably want to play Minnesota again.
Okay.
Now that Towns is gone, I think that
Mhm.
that's something that hurt them, and
Okay.
I think you should avoid Oklahoma City at all costs.
Okay.
And I just think that's because I might be expecting too much, but I'm expecting Oklahoma City to look a lot different. They've
Mhm.
added in, that sense of peskiness alongside strength, and I think that's going to hurt Denver. We've already seen that before. Size too, so now you're going to have to deal with Hartenstein, Chet, Caruso, Dort. Like I think that's going to be a tall task. Like versus Minnesota. Now you got to deal with Julius Randle. Obviously, you have to
Mhm.
deal with Anthony Edwards, Gobert. Like I think I'm a little bit more scared of what Oklahoma City can bring to the table.
Okay. I think that's a fair point where, like, with OKC, we don't know the ceiling.
Yeah.
Where, if everything kind of pans out and works out for them with the way their young guys have progressed and they still already have, like a top 10, top 5 guy, that could be the scariest one. Whereas, with Minnesota, you do kind of wonder because, with Minnesota, we still haven't really seen what they really look like yet because obviously it's only preseason, but like Randall hasn't played. DiVincenzo looks pretty good. So, I guess that could be another guy that they could throw out there to try to guard and slow down Jamal Murray. But you do kind of wonder positionally, how does that change things, right? Because now you're not putting back to back to back, 7 footers. Well, Reed isn't 7 feet, but you know what I mean? Like, back to back to back big physical centers on Jokic. But, Randall's a big physical guy. He's just not a 7 footer.
Yeah.
So, and that's where like they might be rangier. And then they added DiVincenzo as a perimeter guy. So I'm not sure, but I feel like I don't feel like Denver should be quite as worried about Minnesota now, just because of the fact that they did lose a little bit of big man size,
Hmm.
even though again Randall is still like a big, just like a 4, as
Yeah.
opposed to Towns who's more like a 5. But but OKC, I think I'm kind of with you. I think that's probably the one that I'm scared of. And then what do you think about Dallas matching up against Denver? Like if you're Denver, like should you just not be worried or concerned about them at all? Because we only really got to see one game between them post trade deadline, and that was the game with Kyrie with the sweeping game winning hook shot in the regular season. Because
Yeah.
the game before, right, like they didn't have like PJ Washington and uh Daniel Gafford, and then obviously now they've swapped out Derek Jones with Klay Thompson. So
I mean, I'd be
what
scared
do
of
you
them
think?
offensively,
Okay.
but defensively, can they
Mm-hmm.
really slow down Jokic? That would be my thing. I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
In a 7-game series, probably not. But at the same time, you could also say, could Denver be able to slow down Kyrie and Luca? Probably not. So
Right. Cause,
I'd still rather take my chances with those two guys
mm-hmm.
and what Denver can do offensively versus what Oklahoma City could potentially do.
Right. And I think that's kind of where OKC, it feels like might have the highest ceiling. Like whatever the best version of them is, might be the scariest one
Hmm.
compared to like Dallas's floor is probably you know pretty solid, and then like with Minnesota, it could go either way, right? Where like I don't think either you nor I expect Minnesota to just have like a big drop off, but I think we might be a little bit more skeptical about could they realistically contend and win the title this year. Um, just but again, we might be sleeping on Minnesota because I mean, I think you know, have your thoughts about that trade changed at all? Right from the perspective of like what you thought about it before, do you like it more or less for one of those teams now? Now that we've seen like a little bit of some of the preseason basketball, or is it kind of like we're still at where we're at before, and we just
It
kind of
was
maybe just need to see a little bit more in the regular season?
it was smart from both teams' perspectives. I don't think I've really changed my thought process on that. Um, and I will say this: I think as a unit, I think Minnesota probably won't do as well in the playoffs, but I'm still super high on them in their core. Like Anthony Edwards, I expect him to take another jump, and him to continuously get better and stuff like that. But I don't know in terms of what they're gonna do in the postseason. I just think if they meet Denver, it's gonna be a little bit different than last year
Right.
because of the team's construction. Like I just think having Towns and Gobert out there was a little bit overwhelming for that Denver team because they hadn't really faced anything like that.
Mhm.
But then you saw where it turned to complete dog crap in the next round. So
Yeah.
there's a reason why I think that unit was broken up. Um, but I mean, at the end of the day, I do like what the Minnesota pieces have looked like. Like you said, DiVincenzo's looked pretty good through his preseason games. I think in theory the Randall thing will work on both ends of the floor, but just not against Denver.
Yeah, I think I am a little bit higher, like in terms of like what I thought about it with Minnesota now than I was before. But um, but I think I think like with OKC, the ceiling is really high. And then for Minnesota, I think the playoff floor maybe a little bit lower, and then Dallas's playoff, floor and ceiling is you know pretty stable because like I think Dallas like could still they could get to the finals or they could go out in the second round. Just kind of depends, and all of them, it depends on the matchup. It's
Right.
just, I just think with Minnesota, the floor, maybe a little bit lower. But again, who knows? Randall could just ball out, and then it doesn't really matter. But either way, yeah, with the Denver Nuggets, yeah, I'd say last year not a great year from them, and I think some of that you just chalk up to just they it was a bad matchup and they just seemed like they just didn't have it in the end. But I still can't really explain how the heck they lost a 20-point lead in the second half that quickly. And
Yep.
that's the part where it just maybe that was like you said, was maybe that's where you lean into like just kind of a fluke and
Yeah.
they should still be fine. And that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I obviously, a very long-winded explanation and discussion, but I think they'll still be good. I think they'll still be one of the best teams in the Western Conference with a good shot at being able to come out of the West and possibly win the title. Just not quite as high as I think I was like a year ago or
Yeah.
or
And
whatever.
that's
You know
fair.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at. Then last but not least, I guess, let's say they get out of the Western Conference. Where do you see them matching up against the other Eastern Conference teams? Like, do you think they can beat any of them, essentially, or is there kind of a limit to what they could probably do realistically? Let's say like best case scenario for the Nuggets.
Um, I don't think they beat Boston, if I'm keeping it real.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and by that logic, I don't think they beat New York either. Um,
Okay.
I think they could beat Milwaukee, Philly, and that's probably about it. I don't think they can beat Boston and New York. I think I'm the highest on the New York Knicks and Boston Celtics
Mm-hmm.
in the entire league, and I'm just keeping it real.
So, is it mainly just because it's like the Nuggets feel like they've probably gotten worse, whereas the Celtics are, basically probably going to be as good as they were the year before, maybe a little better if like Tatum and Brown are even better. And it's just like, if you're the Nuggets, how do you match up against both of them? And then you add in Porzingis and all that. Like, is it just kind of like just the
Yeah,
overall too much?
yeah. Like where do you get the guys and the personnel to stop both those wings? Jamal Murray, I think, would get harassed once again, but this time it'd be by Drew Holiday and Derek White.
Hmm.
Um, Porzingis is always a factor as well, and same thing with New York, pretty much just different personnel. I think Josh Hart, Anunoby, guys like that, they're gonna make it
Hmm.
difficult on a guy like Jamal Murray because I think that's what it all comes down to. We already know Jokic is gonna get his regardless. Um, it's the other guys, and that's kind of what it's always been about with this team. And I think the other guys on some of these other squads like New York and Boston, I'm a little bit higher on than Denver, and that's just
Hmm.
me keeping it real.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of fair to say in a way because like when you look at the Nuggets compared to say like the Celtics, I guess you kind of look at the Nuggets as like you said, they're just not quite as good as they were before. And as I already kind of mentioned, like that's the best case scenario, right?
Mm,
Whereas like the most likely scenario, where let's say like the combination of Brown, Watson, and Strother are like decent, okay, but not necessarily great, and then really good version of Jamal Murray and Jokic. That's like the more likely scenario. That may not be quite enough this time to overcome, those teams. Like maybe the Knicks. I don't know. Possibly. Like it's not like they have no shot, but I think it's a little bit tougher of a task this time around, just because I'm not quite sure about the surrounding pieces compared to before. And I think that now again, last year in the regular season, like they did pretty good. I think they beat Boston in both matchups, and then against the Knicks, I think the Knicks destroyed them in one of those games. And then in another game, I think the Nuggets kind of edged it out. But again, the Knicks were very different. So they could do it. It's just I think it'd be a little bit harder to pick them this time around. But we know the Nuggets at home obviously are dynamite. Even though we just saw them get waxed off their home court in Game 7 last year, so they could do it. But I think it might be a little bit tougher. And then what do you see? What makes them better equipped? I guess against say like Milwaukee and Philadelphia.
Um, that might just be me, honestly, not being as high on Milwaukee and Philly in general.
Okay.
I think in not a 1v1, but in the matchup of Jokic and Embiid, I think Jokic will probably take take that. Say Philly does get to the finals, highly
Mhm.
unlikely. But I think Jokic would be the better player in that between him and Embiid. And then with Milwaukee, I think they have the personnel to slow down a team like Milwaukee a little bit better. I think Milwaukee's a little bit more one dimensional than some of these teams on both ends
Mhm.
of the floor. Um,
Mhm.
Defensively, Milwaukee's not that great. So, I think, taking a look at that, I think Denver would kind of be able to take advantage of something like that. Kind of same thing with Philly as well. So, I think they have they just match up better, I think, personnel wise with those
Mhm.
kinds of teams versus ones that have like these insane supporting casts at 1 through 5.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point where just matchup wise, again, like the Bucks have the size in the front court, um, but then and I guess like you have Giannis, Middleton, and Dame, and like both, and we'll and like with the Nuggets, we'll see if Jokic can kind of slow down Giannis and Lopez attacking
No,
the rim.
he
But I think
wouldn't.
no, I don't think so either. But again, like you said, are the Bucks going to be able to slow down Denver? Like probably not. I mean, like maybe at the rim it might be tougher, but then like in transition, I think the Nuggets would have a very significant advantage just because a lot
Would
of the
they?
guys on the Bucks, other than Giannis, are older. So that's kind of the issue. And then with Philly, it's kind of funny, right? Because we don't really see like a ton of Embiid and Jokic matchups except for I guess like Philly or whatever, like when they're in Philly. And I think Philly's won the majority of those, but it is the regular season. But obviously Philly's team looks a lot different than Denver's because I mean they basically completely overhauled their roster. Like they
Mm-hmm.
added Paul George and Caleb Martin and Drummond and all these other guys, in addition to who was, to Embiid and Maxi and Oubre who were already there. So I don't know. I mean, like the issue with Philly is that like outside of Embiid, they still seem kind of small. So that's kind of possibly an issue there where it's like, Caleb Martin or Paul George is going to have to contend with Aaron Gordon on the boards.
Yeah,
So that might
right.
be a little bit
It's not
difficult.
a good
Uh,
matchup.
Right, and then I guess you're gonna have to ask Oubre to guard Jamal Murray because you're not gonna ask Maxi to do that. But then who's gonna guard Maxi for Denver? I don't know, but that could be an interesting matchup. And then I guess Philly has a little bit more depth than Denver, but yeah, I feel like for Denver, Boston may be a little bit tough to overcome because now that Boston seems like they figured it out, like they may just be just too tough to stop for a lot of these teams. If
Mm-hmm.
they're healthy, because of
Yep.
course the Porzingis factor. Like I think you need a healthy Porzingis more for the Nuggets than you need him for say like the Mavs, since the Nuggets
100%.
don't since the Mavs don't really have, like a center that you're really worried about offensively, even though like obviously those guys are, helpful. You know what I mean? Just in terms of like, they're not Jokic.
Yeah.
Um so, so that's where I'm kind of at too, where I think for the Nuggets, I think it's gonna be harder for me to envision them winning the title, but I think I could see them making the finals.
Yeah.
And just I think, if they have to go against Boston, that may be a little bit tougher this time. But, you could at least make the case like, all right, they got the best player on the floor, so they'd have a realistic chance. And, the Celtics probably couldn't slow them down. But then Boston probably has, you know, four of the next five best players, right? Because then it would be
Right.
Tatum and
Yep.
then Brown.
Yep.
I think both of them are better than Jamal Murray. And then it would be Murray. And then it would be, like Holiday, Gordon, and White. But what do you think about some of these teams that we've seen in the preseason? And like, have your thoughts changed on any of these teams at all? Obviously, it's preseason, so you always want to take these games with a grain of salt because we have been burned quite a handful of times. Sometimes, taking stock in the preseason, but you just can't really help it sometimes.
Yeah, I mean Boston, New York, they both look legit, kind of like,
Hmm.
what I think everyone's kind of expecting. But I will say, I think the surprise through preseason has definitely been the Warriors. Um, take it with a grain of salt. They are undefeated, but I don't think they're gonna have like a crazy stellar season just based off of this. But
Hmm.
it has been surprising. I didn't think they would look the part, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Then defensively is kind of where they really stand out. It's
mhm,
just I just got to see, who are the other consistent offensive guys after Steph. But obviously
right.
we'll get to them when we get to them.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, like you said, defensively not too shabby. Like through preseason, they're only allowing 100 points per game, from their opponents, so that's pretty
Mhm.
solid. But yeah, that's kind of like the only ones that I've really been like super duper like laser focused in on because they're at the
Right.
top because that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah. And some of these teams, we're going to get to relatively soon, right?
Yeah.
Because we are done with the Northwest Division and we only have one division left, and that's the Pacific Division.
Yep.
So some of these teams will actually be able to kind of, take a deeper dive into. So, that's kind of where we are. So that's, pretty much it for off ball takes. I guess one more thing, just congrats to all the people that have been, inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, right? A lot of, key guys that have been added in there, right? Like Chauncey Billups, right? Vince Carter, Michael Cooper, right? Dick Barnett, even some other guys who were already kind of in there before, like Jerry West. This is his third time being inducted, although this time it's posthumously, right? But it's as an executive. And then, some others like Simone Augustus and, other people in there as well. They even also inducted some like super fans, right? Like guys that have been like long time supporters of their teams, right? Like I think it was Jack Nicholson for the Lakers, right? Spike Lee for the Knicks, Billy Crystal for the Clippers, and then I think it was what is his I think the guy, the Raptors super fan, I can't remember his name.
Oh,
Um
yeah, I know you're talking about. God
yeah,
damn. Yeah,
exactly.
I know you're talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, because yeah, I don't know him as well, but I know he's, that's the guy that's always at every Raptors game, sitting there. But yeah,
Yeah, the
congrats to all those.
Nav Badia.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
Nav.
Yeah, that was the one guy where I knew, of him, I just didn't know his name.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but yeah, congratulations to everybody getting inducted into the Hall of Fame, right? Because that's quite an accomplishment. Um, and again, hopefully we'll continue to see, others also be inducted into the Hall of Fame as we go. Because it's kind of funny because some of these guys, I think Walter Davis, also who recently passed, he was inducted in there as well. Not going to name every single name, but it is kind of wild because some of these people are people who had retired a while ago, right? But they had just recently been inducted because not everybody, I think, gets in there the first time they're eligible. Sometimes it takes a minute for them to
Mm-hmm.
get in there. So, congratulations to everybody who got in there.
Yeah.
But you have any final thoughts on that before we close out?
No, just W Hall of Fame class. I've been
Yeah.
seeing it all over social media. Like even like media people have been getting in too. It's pretty cool, like
Mhm.
to see some throwback
Right.
clips.
Yeah. What was it like? J.A. Adonde,
Yeah.
and I think a couple other people as well. So.
Yeah. So shout out to them too.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments on the Denver Nuggets, their offseason, your expectations for them, where you think they will end up in the season. And, again, NBA season is, only, I believe, less than 2 weeks away, right? So, I mean, I want to say it's Thursday, the 22nd or so. So, obviously, once the NBA season is here, we'll be covering games, we'll be talking about the league and everything. And we're gonna try, to see if we can, probably do some live streams at different points. We haven't ultimately decided yet, but we'll probably try to do them at some point. To try to connect to everybody because we have a lot of new subscribers since we last did this.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to see everybody, and we want to kind of talk and converse and see everybody's thoughts on this. So, we appreciate everybody for continuing to subscribe and support our content. Again, like, comment, and subscribe on the videos, right? Click on the bell to get the notifications. If you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning, just like you saw us do. And we'll see you in the next episode.